Marcus Bennett was accustomed to mornings like this one. At 6 in the morning, the still shy sun over Chicago reflected in puddles formed by the early morning rain. Marcus, 39 years old, was walking to the bus stop wearing his worn uniform from Midwest Freight Logistics. It was a special day, but he tried not to get his hopes up too high. For 12 years, he had repeated that routine, arriving early, working hard, and watching less prepared colleagues pass him by. His life had been reduced to the silent hope that one day the opportunity would finally appear. Now, with an interview scheduled for the warehouse supervisor position, Marcus felt that perhaps it was his turn, even though he couldn't show any anxiety. Life had never been easy for Marcus. He learned early on that he had to fight twice as hard to be recognized for half the effort. While many colleagues complained about small injustices, Marcus dealt daily with suspicious looks and discreet comments, suggesting that he did not belong in that environment. He endured everything in silence, keeping his head down and working consistently, because he knew that more than a promotion, the position would mean better conditions for his sick mother. Every tight paycheck, every extra hour worked, and every humiliation swallowed had the sole purpose of ensuring she received the proper medical treatment. That was why Marcus could not fail on that day. Marcus arrived early at the warehouse entrance, checking the old watch on his wrist that showed there were still 15 minutes left before the interview. The rain had restarted, thin and cold, creating small droplets that slid down his face as he nervously adjusted the worn badge with his name. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, but Marcus knew that nothing in his life ever came easily. While waiting near the loading platform, he mentally rehearsed the answers he had prepared the previous night, trying to ward off the growing nervousness. It was at that moment that his eyes caught a strange movement in the corner of the yard, near the side gate. An elderly woman was walking slowly, hunched under the rain, visibly fragile. Marcus watched intently, feeling an immediate discomfort at the unexpected scene. The woman continued to approach with trembling steps, trying in vain to shield herself from the rain with a small, already broken umbrella. Instinctively, Marcus stepped toward her, realizing too late the danger of the situation. Before he could react, she slipped on the wet floor, falling hard onto the concrete. Her cry echoed through the yard, a sharp and painful sound that cut deeply into Marcus's heart. As she tried unsuccessfully to get up, other employees arriving at the site merely glanced quickly and looked away, hurrying to start their shifts. Marcus felt a sudden pain in his chest. The strict warning from his supervisor, Callahan, still echoed in his mind. "Don't be late, Bennett. They don't give chances to people like you." His heart raced even more, for Marcus knew exactly what was at stake. His entire life depended on that interview, on that single opportunity. Even so, as the woman groaned in pain on the wet ground, Marcus couldn't turn his back. He took a deep breath, feeling that the price of the decision would be high, but he chose to run toward her, already knowing that by doing so, he was risking losing everything he had fought for over the years. Marcus ran to the woman, ignoring the cold that penetrated his already rain-soaked shirt. As he approached, he immediately realized how vulnerable she was. With trembling hands and pale skin, she tried in vain to get up, while an expression of pain deeply marked her aged face. Marcus knelt, positioning himself between the lady and the bitter wind blowing strongly at that moment. With careful movements, he held her arms, supporting her body to prevent further suffering. The woman's hands grabbed his arm with surprising firmness, and Marcus felt the weight of responsibility rapidly growing on his shoulders. He knew that every second there could mean the end of his dream, but something inside him screamed louder than any personal ambition. With a calmness he didn't know he possessed, Marcus took his phone and called an ambulance, quickly explaining what had happened. While waiting for help to arrive, he felt the heavy, critical gaze of his colleagues across the distance. No one seemed willing to interrupt their tasks to help, and Marcus couldn't avoid the bitter feeling that such indifference provoked in him. The woman, still on the ground, murmured confused phrases, mixing apologies with words of gratitude. Marcus tried to reassure her by saying that everything would be all right, even though he wasn't sure of it. He felt his hope slowly drain away as he watched the exact moment of the interview on his watch approach and mercilessly pass by. But at that moment, there was no regret in his heart, only a quiet, sad certainty that he had done what needed to be done. The sound of the ambulance sirens broke the heavy silence of the rain, and Marcus breathed a sigh of relief knowing that the woman would get the help she needed, even if it meant the end of his own plans. The ambulance arrived quickly, bringing with it red lights that reflected in the puddles scattered across the yard. Marcus felt a brief, intense relief as he watched the paramedics swiftly care for the lady, wrapping her in a thermal blanket and carefully immobilizing her legs. He remained by her side the entire time, holding her hand as he tried to soothe her. The rain continued heavily, but Marcus no longer noticed it. His full attention was on the woman, whose teary eyes looked at him with deep gratitude and a mixture of shame and confusion. One of the paramedics asked Marcus if he was a relative of the victim. He shook his head, explaining briefly what had happened, trying to keep his voice steady despite the inner tension he felt. At that exact moment, a sudden noise echoed from the other side of the yard. Marcus immediately recognized the harsh voice of Callahan, his supervisor. The man was marching toward them with an expression that mixed anger and impatience, indifferent to the delicate scene unfolding there. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, clearly aware of what was about to happen. When he got closer, Callahan abruptly interrupted the conversation between Marcus and the paramedic, pointing at him with an accusatory finger. "Have you lost your mind, Bennett? It wasn't your responsibility to handle that. You had one job today and you managed to ruin everything." He barked in a harsh and humiliating tone that drew the attention of other employees. Marcus tried to explain that he couldn't leave the woman abandoned in those conditions, but Callahan didn't give him a chance to argue. With unrelenting coldness, he announced right then, in front of the paramedics and the employees watching the embarrassing scene, that Marcus was fired for insubordination and dereliction of duty. Marcus felt as if the ground had vanished from under his feet, but he remained silent, aware that arguing would be useless at that moment. The silence that followed Callahan's sentence was deafening. Marcus felt the gazes of the other workers fixed on his back, some filled with pity, others with pure indifference. No one spoke up. No one dared to intervene. He knew that for many there, his firing was just another confirmation of something they already expected. Marcus had never been one of them, never seen as someone worthy of advancement. He swallowed hard, remaining still as Callahan continued to unload his frustration. "You knew what was at stake, Bennett, and yet you chose to throw your opportunity away. That's why guys like you never get far." The words cut deep, but Marcus did not react. He refused to give Callahan the satisfaction of seeing him shaken. The lady on the stretcher looked at Marcus with an expression of pain that went beyond the physical. She tried to say something, but one of the paramedics interrupted her, asking her to remain calm. Before being placed in the ambulance, she squeezed Marcus's hand one last time, and he felt that, in that simple gesture, there was more recognition than he had ever received from his superiors in all those years. When the ambulance left, taking the woman to an unknown destination, Marcus stood still for a few seconds, feeling the rain stream down his face as if it wanted to wash away the indignation growing inside him. The weight of reality fell on his shoulders with brutal force. He had done the right thing. He knew that, but he was alone. No good deed changes the fact that bills must be paid, that his mother still needed expensive medication, and that now he was unemployed. With a heavy sigh, he slowly turned, grabbed his things, and walked out of the warehouse without looking back. The walk to the bus stop seemed longer than usual. Every rain-soaked step seemed to drag with it the weight of years of hard work thrown away in just a few minutes. The cold cut through his skin, but Marcus barely felt it. His mind was numb, circling around the only question that mattered now. What now? He looked at his empty hands, accustomed to hard work, now without purpose, without direction. What hurt the most wasn't being fired. After all, he had always expected that something like this might happen eventually. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness, of watching his life slip through his fingers without being able to do anything. He did not regret the decision he had made, but that didn't mean he didn't feel its devastating impact. The bus arrived and Marcus boarded without saying a word to the driver, sitting by the window and watching the city pass by as gray blurs through the wet glass. Chicago seemed indifferent to his pain, just like Callahan, just like all those who witnessed his firing and simply went back to their routines, untouched by what they had seen. When he got off at his home street, the raindrops were lighter, but the weight on Marcus's shoulders remained the same. He opened his front door and was met by the faint smell of cold coffee and medicine, a silent reminder of the reason he had endured so many years at that warehouse. His mother was asleep on the sofa, a thin blanket covering her frail body. Marcus approached, bending down to adjust the blanket more comfortably over her, feeling his heart tighten. She did not know. She did not know that afternoon, he should have returned home with a secure future, with a decent salary, with a new horizon. But instead, he was there, back to square one. Marcus sat at the table, pulling out the old laptop he used to search for jobs. The screen lit up his tired face as he scrolled through listings that promised little and demanded much. Manual labor, night shifts, temporary contracts. Nothing that could pay the household bills, much less his mother's expensive medication. He pressed his temples, taking a deep breath, trying to push away the despair that threatened to take hold. Shouldn't the right choice have a meaning greater than this? So why did he feel so defeated? In the middle of the night, Marcus was awakened by an unexpected sound. The ringing of the phone broke the silence of the dark apartment, and he looked at the clock by his bed. It was almost 1 a.m. With heavy, sleepy eyes and a lingering sense of discomfort in his chest, he hesitated before picking up the phone. When he answered, a calm and firm female voice came from the other end. Marcus Bennett? He took a few seconds to process the question. The name sounded strange at the moment, as if it were no longer his, but soon he replied, "Yes, it's me. Who is this?" "My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm the CEO of Carter Global Enterprises. I am the daughter of the lady you helped today, Mrs. Margaret Carter." Marcus felt a slight shiver. The woman from the ambulance, the lady he had helped in the rain. His mind, still confused, couldn't immediately connect the dots. Evelyn's voice was serene but carried a firmness that demanded attention. "I would very much like to speak with you, Marcus. What you did today did not go unnoticed. I would like to invite you to a meeting. There is something very important we need to discuss." The words scratched at his mind, but he didn't question them. At first, he thought it might be some kind of mistake or even a joke. However, the seriousness in Evelyn's voice made everything seem very real. He felt the weight of the conversation as if it were an opportunity he had never imagined. Initially, he hesitated, but the desire to understand what lay behind that call was stronger. "Can I come tomorrow?" he asked, his voice still choked. Evelyn confirmed, scheduling a time for him to come to the company headquarters. Marcus fell silent for a moment, not knowing what to expect. The rain had already stopped outside, but his world still seemed blurred. When he hung up, a strange feeling settled in his chest, something between hope and skepticism. He knew that nothing would be simple, but what did he really have to lose now? The next day, Marcus dressed more carefully than usual. He put on the newest shirt he had, wore the shoes he usually used for interviews, and nervously adjusted his tie. The trip to the Carter Global Enterprises building seemed distant and surreal. With every corner he turned, the sensation of going to a place that did not belong to his world increased. Chicago, with its frenetic pace, seemed even more indifferent to his existence. When he arrived at the indicated address, the view paralyzed him for a moment. The building was enormous, a glass tower that reflected the surrounding city with an almost impersonal shine. He felt small in the face of that structure. With a sigh, he entered. The receptionist guided him through modern corridors, and Marcus could hardly believe he was inside a place like that. Every detail seemed expensive. Everything appeared imposing and distant. For a moment, he felt out of place, as if the world there were made of a different substance, something he could never reach. When he arrived at the conference room, he was greeted by Evelyn Carter and her brother Ethan, who soon invited him to sit down. Evelyn's words were direct, without preamble. "Marcus, we know what happened yesterday, and we also know that you did what any human being with even a modicum of compassion would do, but we also understand the price that came for you." Her voice was firm, yet there was a slight softness that conveyed a comforting seriousness. She paused before continuing. "Our company has a subsidiary called Midwest Freight Logistics, and after what happened yesterday, we decided that we need someone with your vision and character to handle our social initiatives." Marcus was stunned. He couldn't process the words. Evelyn and Ethan exchanged glances, as if waiting for him to absorb what was being said. He looked at both of them, then at the table in front of him, at a loss for words. What he had thought was a simple thank you meeting was turning into something completely different. He couldn't believe he was there, inside a place like that, being considered for something much greater than the simple supervisor position he had lost. Then Evelyn leaned forward, placing a contract on the table. "We want you to take on the role of Director of Community Outreach, Marcus. It will be a key role for the company and, more importantly, for our mission to give a voice to those who have been left behind, like you. Moreover, your mother and you will have all the health and housing conditions you deserve. What makes us believe that you are the right one for this role? Your character." Marcus looked at the contract. He didn't know what to say, still stunned by the words and the surprise, but deep inside, he felt something he couldn't ignore. He was no longer alone. Marcus took a moment to absorb what was happening. Evelyn and Ethan's words mingled with the echo of those that Callahan had said to him just a few hours earlier. Words that had shattered him. But now, before him, lay a new reality. He looked at the contract on the table, his eyes wavering between the documents and the faces in front of him. The offer seemed too surreal to be real. It wasn't just any opportunity. It was a chance to change his life in a way he had never imagined possible. He was not used to being recognized for his character, but for his dedication to work. And there in that glass office was a recognition that went far beyond that. Evelyn observed Marcus intently, as if expecting him to make the choice, not just as a professional, but as a human being. She knew he was afraid to believe too much, afraid to give in to something that seemed too good to be true. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at the signature line on the contract, his eyes misty, feeling a lump in his throat. He knew that the decision he made there would change the course of his life. He thought of his mother, of the sacrifices he had made for her, and of what it meant to be a decent person in a world that didn't always value that. "I accept," he said, his voice coming out almost inaudibly, yet firmly. He couldn't hide the emotion that overwhelmed him. Evelyn and Ethan exchanged satisfied glances, both knowing that Marcus's choice was not only a personal advancement, but also a victory against the adversities he had always faced. They knew he was the type of leader that Carter Global needed for its social change initiatives. Marcus looked at them, still stunned, but now feeling a sense of relief spreading through his body. He was no longer carrying the weight of a solitary decision. Now, he was part of something bigger. Evelyn smiled, picking up the pen and pointing to the contract as a symbolic gesture of a new beginning. "Congratulations, Marcus. Welcome to the team." He took the pen, signed, and handed back the contract, and for a moment, the future seemed less frightening. No longer an overwhelming burden, but a chance to build something real, something that had meaning for him and for others. He thought of the years he had spent fighting for recognition that seemed never to come, but now he had something far more valuable, the opportunity to help others overcome their own struggles, something he knew firsthand. The door that had closed behind him and Callahan now seemed so distant, like a memory from another time. 3 months passed since Marcus signed that contract, and the change in his life was deeper than he had imagined. As Director of Community Outreach, he was responsible for implementing programs aimed at both the Carter Global employees and the underprivileged communities around the company's branches. The work required much more than simply managing projects. He needed to be the face of change, someone who understood people's hardships and knew how to turn those hardships into opportunities. In the beginning, it was difficult. He had no idea where to start, but he knew he couldn't fail. After all, he had seen firsthand what it meant to be left behind, ignored. Now he was in a position to help those who, like him, deserved a chance. His mother, who was now receiving proper medical treatment, watched the changes with a silent pride. She didn't fully understand Marcus's new job, but she saw the difference in his eyes, in the way he dedicated himself. It was as if gradually he was leaving behind the man who had accepted being invisible, replacing him with someone who knew what he wanted and what he could offer the world. And that, to her, was the greatest proof that he was fulfilling his purpose. One day, while he was visiting one of the factories to implement a new training program, one of the new employees approached him in the corridor. The man, a worker just starting there with uncertain and hesitant eyes, looked at Marcus and finally said, "You know, I heard your story, that you were at that company, but that you never gave up, even when it seemed that everything was lost. I wanted my son to see that, a man who, no matter how far he fell, knew how to get back up." He looked at Marcus with a glimmer of respect in his eyes, and Marcus, with a shy smile, felt warmth in his chest. It wasn't the kind of respect he had sought by doing the right thing. It was the kind of respect that was born of truth, of a struggle that everyone could see, but few truly understood. And in that moment, Marcus realized that what he had done on that rainy day by choosing to help a stranger instead of chasing a promotion had not been a mistake. The decision had changed the direction of his life, but more importantly, it had given it meaning. He was exactly where he needed to be, not because life had given him something easy, but because he had chosen to be who he truly was, without excuses. And now he could look back and see that, as painful as it was, it did not define him. What defined him was the path he was beginning to tread. And on that path, he knew that his mission, more than ever, was to help transform lives. Marcus was in the office of his new home, a simple space that he already called home. His mother slept in the room next door, peaceful, with her medical care up to date, and for the first time in a long time, without the visible pain on her face. Marcus looked out the window and saw the hustle of the city below. Life seemed to go on, relentless. But for him, everything had changed. With each day in his role as Director of Community Outreach, he became more convinced that he was in the right place. The mission he now carried was not just about social programs or corporate policies. It was about giving a voice to people who, like him, had been silenced by a lack of opportunities, by discrimination, by the narrow vision of a system that only recognized the strongest and most privileged. His work involved everything from creating professional training programs to implementing initiatives to combat workplace discrimination. He knew how deep and complex these challenges were, but he felt prepared. Perhaps by his own experience of having been neglected and yet having stayed strong. Marcus also knew that, as small as the changes might be, they had a real impact on many people's lives. The stories that began to arrive from the company's workers, saying that their lives were improving because of Carter Global's actions, were the ones that touched him the most. He wasn't there to be a savior, but to create a space where others could have the chance to achieve what he had never had before: dignity and respect. On one of his visits to a company branch, Marcus was approached by a man who, upon seeing him, paused for a moment as if he had recognized something. The man, who worked as a forklift operator, looked at Marcus with a mixture of surprise and admiration. You're the guy, right? The one who helped that lady that day in the rain?" he asked hesitantly, as if trying to figure out if he was talking to the right person. Marcus, smiling, nodded. He knew what that recognition meant. It wasn't just about the act of helping a woman in danger. It was about the courage to make decisions that could cost everything, but that in the end had a value that no one could take away. The man continued, his voice filled with gratitude. "I just wanted to say that because of you, now I have hope. You don't know what it's like to be treated as invisible until someone truly sees you. Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't need any more words. The impact of his decision, which had seemed like just a simple act of kindness that day, was reflected in every life it touched. And in that moment, he knew that his journey had been worth it. He realized that the true promotion wasn't about the position, but about the legacy of humanity he was creating by helping others get back on their feet. As the months passed, the impact of Marcus's work became increasingly visible within Carter Global. His inclusion and empowerment programs not only gained strength, but also began to be seen as models throughout the company. He was invited to meetings with high-level executives, something he had never imagined, and began to be respected not just as someone who had been left behind, but as a leader who brought real change. He had never sought recognition, but now he was beginning to understand that true leadership wasn't about being placed on a pedestal, but about being able to lift others around you. And with each new project, Marcus felt more fulfilled, knowing that he was fulfilling his mission. He visited different branches of the company, talked with the employees, and observed the results of the inclusion programs he had devised himself. He didn't want to be just an empty inspiration, a story everyone would tell and then forget. Marcus wanted his actions to be so impactful that, even when he was no longer there, the seeds he had planted would continue to grow. On one of those days, while walking through the corridors of the company headquarters, Marcus was approached by one of his work colleagues, a man he only knew superficially. The man looked at him with a genuine smile and said, "I don't know if you realize it, but what you're doing here has changed everything, not only within the company but outside it as well. The people who come after us, the younger ones, will remember what you did." Marcus fell silent for a moment, touched, yet unsure how to respond. He was used to being an observer, to being the person who stayed on the sidelines unnoticed. Now he was at the center of something bigger, something that transcended what he had ever imagined for himself. He knew there was still much to do, that the fight for equality and dignity would never end. But he was ready to continue the journey, aware that what truly mattered was not the destination, but the path taken and the lives impacted along the way. That night, when Marcus arrived home, he found his mother in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was smiling, her face looking healthier and more animated. When he entered, she looked at him and said with a tenderness that touched him deeply, "I'm so proud of you, Marcus. Not just for everything you've done, but for who you've become." He didn't know what to say. There weren't enough words to express all he felt in that moment, so he simply embraced her, certain that the decision he had made years ago on that rainy day had been more than right. It had been the foundation for everything, and now he had the chance to give back to those who needed it the most what she had always given him: support, love, and hope. As the aroma of dinner filled the room, Marcus looked out the window at the city lights below. Life, finally, was beginning to make sense, and he knew that, regardless of the challenges that were yet to come, he was ready to face them, always with the same integrity and courage that had guided him from the beginning. Marcus's journey was far from easy.